Okay, well, my advice for next year's student would be to dive in straight away. Basically try and make the most of the facilities, make the most of the people, so do ask questions as soon as you get into the building. Try and ask everybody questions, because that gets you to make the most of the facilities and the most of the people, and ensures that the learning experience is a lot more thorough, in my opinion.
So I think the advice for next year students would be to definitely start all of the tasks a lot sooner, so that they can start making lots of mistakes, experimenting with layout, with typography, and just focusing on the main project. Each project, but just start actually doing it from the very beginning.
Yeah, I'd get started as soon as you can, because that allows you to experiment without so much pressure, and it also allows you to have time for mistakes and things going wrong. You've then got time to correct them.
The advice I'd give to next year students is to keep on top of things, and I think there's a tendency to feel that you've got plenty of time and things will, suddenly, your ideas will suddenly come to fruition. But I think the real value is experimentation and trying to get as much off-the-wall thinking going as possible. I think the tasks are quite basic, and it's good to try and explore different media, try and explore different techniques, and make sure that your work is pushing yourself out of your comfort zone as well.
Don't put it off that there's plenty of time coming in the year, because it does creep up on you a bit. And that summer period, those 3 months, you really need to get your head down and do the work, the experimentation, and not leave it to the end where you've got to finish off projects that perhaps you should have finished off halfway through the year, say.
Well, the advice that I would give to the next year students is definitely to start with the work straight away, because otherwise it can get a bit like too much to get into, like all the projects in one go. So better to start at the beginning and then upgrade.
Try and, I think while you're at college, is the opportunity to just, be really experimental with briefs. Don't be constrained by the briefs, and think big. Don't, even though there are issues with limitations of production and time and money, but try and push them as far as you can, because I think that's what people look for in a portfolio. And I think, once you're out in the commercial world, you don't have as much flexibility and opportunity to experiment as much. So that's the time to really take that opportunity.
I'd probably say I'd spend more time looking at and producing more kind of different design outcomes, like kind of going through the investigation a bit more. I'd spend more time, because often I would kind of just pick the design and go straight for it and want to rework it when I got to the final stages. I'd also say it's really helpful to go to the printers and see as many paper stocks as you can, and try and do tests, like dummy runs of your projects as well.
In the beginning, experimentation I was petrified by it, because again, I didn't come from a design background. So for me, sketching was it didn't feel natural to me, and so I didn't really understand the whole concept of, trial and error. Just try and retry. I thought, well, hey, I've got an idea, and that's going to be the idea. The thing is it's not that idea. That idea will lead you to, probably the final idea, but between that, you'll probably have about like 20 different trials. So I learned that just by doing stuff, just by cutting and just trying, and whether it's bad or good, and just to not to get so emotionally attached to it, because it's not really, that's just the beginning. And
regarding the use of the facilities, I would suggest to start to use them as soon as possible as well, because they can really help you to develop your work, and the tutors there are also very helpful. And
also the facilities in college are so great. I think it's really worth taking advantage of that. and obviously you can print outside college, but I personally really like to be involved with the process of printing and production and print finishing. So yeah, Scott and Tony and Jim and John are just great, really helpful, and quite often I think it can work out as being cheaper, so that's another really good thing to use.
Just try and get as much out of the university as possible, because the year goes very quickly, and if you can use the resources, great, and try and just pick everyone's brains while you're here for the year, because you'll never get a chance again.
Another bit of advice would be to not be too scared of the pressure, not think of the pressure as something purely negative. Pressure is always present, not only as part of this course, but also as a factor of your possible future career. So get used to it, it'll help you.
I suppose in terms of advice and sort of pitfalls and mistakes that you would make, I know with myself, I think it's helpful to try and not get too caught up and to try and just relax and enjoy it, and not put too much pressure on yourself, because I think that'll sort of have a detrimental effect on your work. I know with a lot of what I did, you know, just you get sort of paralyzed by that pressure that you put on yourself to come up with brilliant ideas and that kind of stuff, and I think that can really stop you from just getting on with the work. I read a really interesting article just recently, and it was sort of a manifesto about getting things done, and it said there's 3 states in graphic design, which is not knowing, doing, and done. And I thought that was very, very true. So it's sort of, don't sit around and wait for brilliant ideas to sort of strike you. You have to just get started and realize that it's an iterative process, and that you're not going to know necessarily what the end product will be when you start, and that's fine, that's okay, and just sort of enjoy the process and let it develop, and don't get too attached to what the end product will be.
My advice for next year's students would be to realise the importance of time management, to set yourself strict deadlines for each of the projects and to stick to those, and be prepared to let go of things even if you know that they're not quite as good as they could be, especially when it comes to the production stage, because personally for me that took twice as long as anticipated. So however long you think it's going to take to print things out and to get things in a physical state, double it.
Yeah, my advice would be to not leave the production phase too late. I think 1 week before hand-in is too late. I think you should allow yourself at least 3 weeks in case anything goes wrong, because with printers often there's a problem with the printing, or you find that you've changed some things, you know, because you get advice up to the last week, you get tutorials. So you might want to change something last minute, so it's important to start the production at least, let's say, 3 weeks or 2 weeks before hand-in. Yeah.
I think based on my own experience, it would be to manage your time from the outset. Certainly after the first lesson, get down to the library, get out the first book on the reading list, look up some of the people Tony's mentioned in the workshop, some of the people, some of the practices, some of the movements, and even if you just spend an hour in that first week, just engage with the content. Because I certainly found that the longer I left it, the more there was to do and the harder it was to begin.
The advice that I would give to next year's students would be to get working on outcomes as quickly as possible, because deadline's quite tight and there's a lot to do, and I think that spending too much time worrying about what you're going to do is not a good thing, and just getting on with it and really concentrating and putting as much time into that as you can. It's probably the best thing to do.
So the advice I would give to next year's students is to get into the habit of recording everything you do, all your experiments, no matter how insignificant, because it will really help when you're looking back at it and doing your projects at the end, and get straight into the library and get looking at all the classic design and start getting as much visual input as you can, because all of that will help you when you're making your own decisions. So, yeah.
For me, before I started the course, I hadn't really got into the process of documenting my work to the level that the course requires. But once we started, I really enjoyed it, and you just have to keep everything, document everything that you have.
What I enjoyed the most is one thing that I didn't think I'd ever do. Early on in the course, it was suggested by Tony that we set a blog up, and that is something that I'd never even considered that anything that I would do would be of interest to other people. But I found that a real tonic, in a sense that I started to contact artists for interviews. One thing led to another. I ended up interviewing, I think, 6 artists, and the blog became a great way of research and showing others what you would do.
Possibly from a kind of broader perspective, I think I would say try and find the area of interest that's kind of personal to you and kind of develop that throughout the year. And I say that because I think probably the most memorable pieces of work from this year, from my year, have been ones that, you know, you see the personality of the individual most in them, as opposed.
Leave enough time to experiment and also make a lot of prototypes. I think the experimentation process is really important, and it is something that I had to work hard to get accustomed with, because I was used to just thinking of ideas in my head and then sort of, working them out on the computer. But it's very helpful to do things actually physical, make physical items, and the same goes for when you're making prototypes. I think it's very useful to make the book or the poster or whatever the project is, and have several versions, which could be the final version, just to see what it actually looks like, and also to get used to all the complications that are typical when you're printing and when you're producing a final piece of work. And they're also nice to have and keep at the end, because a lot of them look very professional.
Well, my advice for next students is that they could always experiment earlier on. Also, in terms of especially first part of the year, when all the projects come together at one point, please do keep in mind that there's a lot of printing to be done, and mistakes are made easily, and it's never finished only on a computer screen. It's only finished when you have it physically in your hands, bound, cut, and ready to go, basically. So that's one.
Use the facilities and to use what you have, which is, I think first actually is what I learned the most is learning from the other students. So building relationship is number one, I think, because as much as it is about design, it's kind of a bit personal, so you need to kind of feel like you're comfortable with yourself, but you can't feel comfortable because there's all these people, and you'll be thinking, oh my god, that person's work is really good, and why is my work not as good? And you're going to start, I felt in the beginning I was doubting myself a lot. And by building relationships with other people of the course, that really enabled me to kind of, I don't know, to talk about it with them in a friendly manner and not feel so intimidated by design. Because I didn't come from a design background. So for me, this, typography was like, a word that was so scary to me. But then by chatting stuff with Kate, for example, we talk about it, and then, I build an opinion on something just by casually talking about it. So I think building relationships with your colleagues is great, because you won't even notice that you're kind of doing it and stuff.
My advice to next year's students would be to engage the people that they want to work with externally early on, and to talk to them about what they intend on doing and get as much advice from them as possible, and to understand that because they are external to the university, that they're going to need you to get stuff to them early and give them plenty of time in order to get work printed and produced. And you need to build in a good amount of time and make sure that they understand and you understand exactly what deadlines are.
Yeah, so I guess the advice I'd give to next year students is to get stuck into the reading list straight away. I think if you have a look at that and start with the reading whilst you're doing the design resolution workshops, you can start to get a sense of the areas that you need to learn quite early on. And yeah, it's not a part-time course. Make sure you're doing a lot of work in addition to the workshops, even from the beginning, because it'll stand you in very good stead later on.
Okay, my advice for next year students would be to make the most of your time at university, because you're only here for 1 year possibly, and definitely make the most of all the different studio spaces and all the work with like letterpress and screen printing, and definitely also all the lectures as well. So yeah, and have fun.
I mean, there's lots of good facilities around. There's always people wanting to help you. So do seek that advice. Basically enjoy, work hard and go for it. Have fun.